that Jesus was in this synagogue. And so that's amazing that you can go there and stand in a place and think Jesus himself was probably, there's a very good likelihood that he was right there, standing right there teaching. And that's one of those things that just gives you chills, right? But I'll tell you, this is interesting. How they know is from the first century, okay? Yes, there we go. Okay, this is how they know. So this is a replica of the altar bench they found, and this is what they would roll the scrolls out on to read. But you'll notice right here, this is a little lamp. Here's a blow-up of it. And so it's sort of like, if you can imagine going 1,000 years in the future and someone finding a house from today, how would they tell what year that house was from? Well, maybe they find an old iPhone, right? And they can tell by the version of the iPhone what year it was. Well, they can tell the year by the shape of the lamps. These are some replicas of lamps from the first century, right? So they know, because obviously they used lamps for thousands of years before electricity, right? They used little oil lamps. And so when they dig up a place and they find the lamps, well, the shape of the lamps changed. And they know that this was from the first century because they found these lamps in the synagogue, and these were for the first century. And by the way, this is really interesting. See this little lip on the top of the lamp? So if you were a Jew, right, and you believed in the Sabbath, but you have your oil lamp, but it's the Sabbath, I can't put more oil in the lamp because that's work. So how do you think you would refill the lamp? I would have guessed this. Any ideas? They take an egg, hollow it out, and poke holes in it, and then you put the egg on top of the lamp so that it slowly drips oil into the lamp. And so it keeps it refilled over the Sabbath. Pretty clever. I never would have thought of that. And I do want to show you this, and you're welcome to look at this. Those are replicas. This is an actual lamp. At least that's what they told me. From the first century. So this is about 2,000 years old. From the Israel area. So this is what, when you read the stories of the lampstands and things like that, and the virgins lighting the lamps, this is the kind of lamps they would use. And just for what it's worth, I was with someone who was an archaeologist, or an amateur archaeologist, and he said that he did believe that this was indeed real. And I looked online, and the price I paid for it is about what you would pay for an authenticated lamp. So I do believe this is real. But anyway, if you want to look at it, you're welcome to. I just thought that was pretty cool. All right, another way they know this is from the first century is they found these coins. These are coins from the first century. So they do know that this synagogue was from the first century. We know it's in Galilee, and we know, and we know that Jesus went into all the synagogues around Galilee according to this verse in Matthew. So like I said, it's very reasonable to believe that Jesus was there. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, how many real lamps did they sell, or were they selling?
So that's a good question. I thought about that myself. But I went online, and I think 2 or 3 people in our group bought one. But if you think about that, the millions of people that come through there, they probably sell millions of lamps. I don't know. Yeah.
I know an ancient coin collector, and he says the amount of Roman coins from this era is just astounding.
Right.
Like you can go on eBay today and buy them by the bushels. I mean, there's just so many out there.
Yeah, so, and I'm going to get back to how common artifacts are in just a minute at the end of this presentation. But I do believe it's authentic. I have every reason to believe. But I just want to point out one thing. This is just a section of the wall of the synagogue. You see how brightly colored it is in reds and yellows and black? It's just very bright and festive. Again, we think of the ancient world as all being gray and the color of dirt, right? But it wasn't. People liked color back then. And so it actually would have been much brighter and more festive than this building right here, which is all wood, right? And so that's something to remember about the ancient world. People dressed in beautiful clothing, colored clothes. They colored their homes and in the synagogues. So it's not, you have to get that thought out of your head. Here, Jesus is standing in this beautiful, beautiful synagogue. And let me go back just real quick. You can see the inlaid work on the floors, right? These patterns. So it would have been a very beautiful building. Okay, let's go on. I got a lot to cover. I wanted to talk about Caesarea just briefly This was built by Herod the Great in honor of Caesar Augustus, therefore Caesarea, Caesar city. And it's remarkable partly because this was at the time the largest constructed harbor in the entire ancient world. So it was an incredible building feat. What I want you to see is this. In Acts 25, when it talks about Paul being brought before Festus and Agrippa at Caesarea, this is the area. This is sort of the main meeting hall, if you will, of the house that was there. So this would have been where Paul was brought. So those flagstones, again, Paul was there. And so that's kind of an amazing thing to think about. But also, I wanted to show you this. They found this paving stone, and it says, in the temple of Augustus that was also in Caesarea, and it says, Pontius Pilatus, the perfect of Judea, erected a building dedicated to the Emperor Tiberius. So that's important, because if I ask you, do you believe there's a real person named Pontius Pilate? We'd probably all say yes. But where's the evidence of that? Can you prove that? And the answer is now, yes, we can, because there's an inscription that bears his name. And again, that is so important, brethren, when you think about the Bible compared to other books, religious books in the world. Remember, we talked about the Book of Mormon briefly, and it has these fanciful stories of Jesus coming to the New World and one of the lost tribes of Israel coming to America. But it has all these names and places, and there's no evidence of any of them. Okay? The Bible is not like that. Same with if you compare the Bible to some of the other books of the world, like the Hindu scriptures or the Buddhist scriptures. The Bible is different because it tells a story in history. No, it's not meant to be primarily a history book. It's meant to be a religious book, but it's rooted in history with real people and real places. And that's how we know the Bible is true, and it's different than all the other religious books in the world. And so things like this, part of us might say, well, okay, who cares? They found Pontius Pilate was real. That's very, very important when we consider the authenticity of the Bible. It's been said if you make an incredible claim, you should have incredible proof. And so that's what the Bible does, because the Bible claims to be the inspired Word of God, and Jesus, the only Son of God, through which the only way we can come to God. So if somebody's going to make that claim, we better have good proof of it, right? And that's reasonable. So when you think about things like this, a paving stone with the name of Pontius Pilate, we can now say, oh, we know from history, there was a guy named Pontius Pilate. He was the ruler of, or the Roman governor, if you will, over Judea at this time in the first century. That's very, very important. When we, the Bible tells us to always be ready to make a defense for the hope that lies within us. And so that's important as we consider, defending the Scriptures. Yes, sir?
We'd like to know coins.
Yeah.
With the inscriptions on there, with a picture of Caesar, I guess, remember when we talked about?
Yeah.
We talked about Brother Caesar, did,
Yep.
Caesar picture was on the coin.
Right.
Is that coin so that?
I don't think so. I'm not an expert in coins either, but I think that coin has, I think it was a Jewish coin. It has the menorah on it. I think, the candlestick. Or it's wheat. I don't know what it is. So, again, remember, not an expert. So, I'm not sure. But that one did not have Caesar's picture on it. Okay, we'll move on. I wanted to show you, this is a picture of the mighty River Jordan. And it reminded me, now back in the day, of course, 2,000 years ago, it would have been broader, it would have been deeper, but still, because a lot of it's been drained away for irrigation and agriculture and things like that, and there's not much left now. But this is a spot where you can go down to the River Jordan, and people actually want to get baptized in that, to say they were baptized in the Jordan. But it is a nasty, muddy river. I have some water from it here, and if you shake it up, you can see all the silt and stuff in it. It's really dirty water. And it just reminded me of that story in 2 Kings 5:12, where, I'm sorry, what was his name?
David?
No, he was going to get healed of, Naaman went to Elisha to get healed of leprosy. Thanks, guys. And And he was like, I don't want to go wash in the Jordan. Like, all these other rivers are much cleaner. Well, when you see it, it's like, yeah, I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to wash in that either. It's like, this is going to make me worse, not better, right? So, like I said, that's the little section of the Jordan, and that's what it looks like today. But of course, back in the day, it would have been much bigger. But I do want to show you this. I thought it was funny. Well, this is right outside there. That's a tourist site, where people go down to the Jordan. And I mean, like right beside it, there's this fence that says, okay, this is a minefield. If you step over here, you're going to die. And it just reminds us how dangerous Israel and Jordan really is. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But it's just sort of shocking because, in America, you would never see that. Can you imagine going out to a tourist site and then right beside it, there's a minefield, right next to the Washington Monument saying if you walk over here, you're going to die. So it's just sort of a shock to see things like that and realize how blessed we are. This is a panorama of the city of Jerusalem. And now we're going to talk about that a little bit. And obviously, you could talk an entire, Bible series just on the city of Jerusalem. And we're only going to hit a few highlights. But I just wanted to notice a couple of things. See this? This is the Dome of the Rock. That's where the original temple would have been. Now there's an Arab mosque on it, and there's a rock where Muhammad supposedly ascended into heaven. So you can't actually get to the actual temple site because there's a mosque on top of it. And the temple area, part of it's controlled by Israel and part of it's controlled by the Arabs. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But I just wanted you to see an overview. This is in modern day in Jerusalem. You walk through and there are all these stalls, selling all kinds of things. These lovely breads. That looked really good. I know, that looks good, doesn't it? There's just a cart sitting out there. But I just wanted to show you that this was a mural also there in Jerusalem, sort of showing what it would have looked like around the first century or that era. And so it probably looked very similarly. You have all these stalls selling everything from food to cookingware to all kinds of stuff like that. And so it's interesting that, it's what we sell is a little different, but people are people, right? It would have been very much the same 2,000 years ago. And would you believe this? There's an Alabama store in Jerusalem where you can buy Alabama memorabilia. I know, it's like, what? But I will tell you this. I know, isn't that amazing? It's like, I'm in Jerusalem and there's an Alabama store. But, I know, you think, what? But I will tell you this, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute too. Of the American tourists that I met and overheard, I would say the vast majority were from the South. And that's just the truth in America. We call this the Bible Belt. There's a reason. We're just more religious here in the South. And I would say the vast majority of everyone, like I said, that I ran into, either they were from the South or I thought they were by their accent, something like that. So I guess this doesn't surprise me, but given the amount of tourists that come from America. Anyway, okay, this is an all-female group of Israelis who are armed, in the plaza there. All Israelis have to serve 2 years in the military, including women. And so this was not unusual to see, armed men and women walking around in Jerusalem. And again, it just makes us think about how lucky we are that, we might see a policeman now and then, but you don't go somewhere in America where you see a large troop of armed young people right in the middle of the square, right? We just don't see that. And so it makes us realize how lucky we are to live in America at this time of such prosperity and such peace, because we're very fortunate. And that's just what it made me think of. And it also makes me think, you see the women here, with the long dark hair, and I didn't say this, but it makes me think in the Song of Solomon, where Solomon is describing his love and how much he loves her, and her hair is like a flock of goats descending the mountain, like dark goats walking down the mountain. You can see her long flowing hair, and that's what it reminded me of. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how crazy people are about Jerusalem. It just makes people go nuts. This is a bus that I saw there, and you see that this guy is in charge of the End Time Ministries, doing a tour of Israel. And this guy, I looked him up online in End Time Ministries. He's a Pentecostal holiness preacher who is one of those guys that preaches like the world is just about to end all the time. I mean, this was 5, 6 years ago, and they take tours talking about how current events are pointing to the fact that the world is about to end, right? And so how long they've been saying that, I don't know. But Jerusalem evokes just insanity among people. I was told by the tour guide that there are Jews that, and I don't know, this is, gossip you hear, but I wouldn't be surprised. He said, that there are Jews who already have recreated all the implements of the temple, and it's sitting in a storage area, and they're just waiting for the time when they can destroy that mosque and rebuild the Jewish temple and have all the furniture ready to go. That could be true. I wouldn't doubt it. Because certainly the Jews, the very Orthodox Jews, still believe the Messiah is coming to restore Israel. Right? It's hard for us to understand that because we believe that Jesus was that long-awaited Messiah, and he did restore spiritual Israel. But true Jews are still waiting for the Messiah to come and restore physical Israel. And I will say, Americans are nuts too because, I overheard this lady say, basically, well, the only reason God has spared America is because we support Israel. And that's because there are a lot of Americans who think the book of Revelation points to a time when when the nation of Israel will be restored. And of course, I think that's completely wrong. But it just shows how tied people are to Jerusalem and these end-time prophecies. And so to show you how nuts people are, this is interesting. Okay, this is Gate Beautiful, right? And it leads, see, there's the Golden Dome, right? And so it leads into the part of the Temple Mount that's controlled by the Arabs. And this is the gate that apparently Orthodox Jews believe the coming Messiah will enter into Jerusalem. But the Arabs control that area. So what did the Arabs do? One, they blocked up the gate. See, it's closed. They completely walled it in. But then they built a cemetery right in front of it. Why would they build a cemetery in front of the gate? Anybody want to guess?
Unclean.
Because it makes a Jew can't walk over a cemetery because it makes them unclean. So therefore, the Messiah can't come through the gate without becoming unclean. So that's how insane people are about the city of Jerusalem. And so it shouldn't surprise us when people fight over it and things like that. Yeah.
I'd like to point out that that's a great picture, and if we take a moment and we go back to the time of Christ, those gates were huge.
Right.
And we see the archways, the double archways for these gates, and they're like 70 feet or something like that, and they were made of bronze. I mean, they were heavy, heavy gates. And no longer they're there, of course, sadly to say. But it just attributes to, like you said, these people during this time are continuously looked down as, uneducated, unorthodox.
Simpletons,
they have no real technology as we want to claim for ourselves.
Right.
But yet, they made beautiful things.
Absolutely.
They had abilities to do things that we still question how they do them.
Absolutely.
Yes. And because we can't recreate it.
Absolutely.
That's
absolutely right.
It's those gates were really something. Anybody coming towards Jerusalem, and if I'm correct, you're coming from across Gethsemane.
Well, there were different entrances, and I don't know. I think there were like 7 different gates in Jerusalem.
Gates, right.
So yeah, it depends on how you would come in. But yes, it would have been impressive to see when you first walked in.
I think if you're coming from the west, coming from over the mountain and everything, you can see these gates, and then
I'm sure you could have.
Then you go through the Garden of Gethsemane area where all the olive trees were on the opposite side.
And we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
I got a picture of it. Yeah.
That's huge. It really is.
Right. Yeah. So, and I just thought this was funny. Don't worry, America, Israel is behind you. I thought I should have bought that T-shirt. Okay. All right. So this is interesting when you read in Matthew, and because of the time, I'm just going to rush through these. But in Matthew 25, when you read about the sheep and the goats, I saw this shepherd right outside Jerusalem. And I know some of those are goats. I think some of them are sheep. But it's interesting, they're grazing together. And you can see that, in this other picture, they've been separated. And so that would have been a common scene, when Jesus was teaching this parable. People would have seen people just right there outside of Jerusalem grazing the sheep and the goats together. Let's move on. Okay, this is the Sea of Galilee. And here's some water from the Sea of Galilee if anybody wants to look at it. It looks like water. But the main thing I want you to see about the Sea of Galilee, it's long and linear, right? But it's not that far across. I mean, this is one side, and you can see right across to the other side. That surprised me. It's much smaller than we think. And again, I'm going to talk about the boats, but they were in small boats, and Art has shown some great videos of the huge storms that can arise suddenly, but it's not that big, and that surprised me. So this is at night, looking across the Sea of Galilee. And you can see the city up on the hill with all the lights. And so when Jesus says, you're a city, you are the light of the world, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden, they would have understood that because they could see that. You could look right across the Sea of Galilee in a city with all its lights on. You could have seen that. So that helped me understand that parable as well. Okay, this is actually let me back up. This is a boat they found on the Sea of Galilee from the 1st century. There was a time of extreme drought and the water dropped, and they found this on the shoreline. So this is very much like the boats that Peter and John would have fished from. When Jesus was in the boat, and the sea came up and he was asleep, it would have been a small boat like this. And again, they know that because this is a fresco of a 1st century boat, and the boat they found looks very, very much like that. So it just gives you an idea of how tiny the boat was, right, that they would have fished from. And if you're in a small boat like that, even if the Sea of Galilee isn't that big, if there's a big storm, you can see how they were afraid of sinking. Okay. Keep going. Okay, I want to say this is really funny. This is in Jerusalem on top of one of the buildings. And the point is, you can stand on some of these buildings and look down on the roofs or sometimes even into like the back courtyards of people's houses because it's so jam-packed. And this certainly would have been what it was like even in the days of Israel. And so when you read that story, 2 Samuel 11:2, when David was walking around the roof of his house and he looks down and he sees Bathsheba, you can certainly understand how that could have happened. In fact, the tour guide said the people who live in Jerusalem today have a very funny saying. It's because everyone lives so close together, packed in tight. They say during the first year of marriage, the husband talks and the wife listens. During the second year of marriage, the wife talks and the husband listens. During the third year of marriage, they both talk and the neighbors listen. So that was pretty funny. Okay, and I just wanted to say something about the oil lamps, like this one. They put out, they're burning olive oil, right? And they have a little wick in them, so they don't put out much light. And so I couldn't help but think about, Bathsheba sometimes gets maligned for being, she was out bathing, at night with the lights on, But she was probably trying to be modest. She was probably bathing at night when everyone should have been asleep, like David. And even if she had the lights on, she probably had one or two little lamps like this. So it's not like she turned on all the lights and was walking around nude, so everybody could see her. It wasn't like that. She was probably bathing in an inner courtyard, which would have been set aside for bathing, late at night with a couple of lamps, just enough to see. So I don't think she was probably trying, to be provocative. It was just one of those things that happened. But anyway. Oh, yes, and that's certainly, sorry. And it also helps you understand, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So it helps, again, understand some of those parables about the lamps. Okay, so there's a church dedicated to the site, and no one knows for sure, but where Peter denied Christ 3 times. This is called the Church of the Rooster, really. And there's Peter and there's the statue. But this is a stone stair. That was where Caiaphas the high priest was, his house. And this is the stairwell that leads up. This is from the first century. And so this could very well be, and it's probably, the stairwell that Jesus walked up when he was walking into the house of Caiaphas the high priest. So seeing things like that are very interesting. But I did want to talk very quickly about this. Underneath and I do think they believe this is the house of Caiaphas the high priest, but under the area they found this deep pit marked by the Byzantine crosses. And remember I told you that the Byzantine crosses were put there by the early church, 500 years, at about 500 AD, but to mark important religious sites where they thought things happened. So this had these Byzantine crosses on it. And even though we don't read this story in the Testament, apparently in the New Testament, apparently the church tradition is that after the trial, before they were going to take Jesus to Pontius Pilate, they lowered him into this pit. And see, here's the hole, right? And it goes down into this pit. And here they have a fresco of Jesus with these ropes being lowered down. That is apparently what they say is church history or tradition. And so one of the things we did is we stood in this pit and read from Psalm 88. And Psalm 88 is really dark. It's called the Black Psalm. Let's go over that. Let's go read Psalm 88. Because I had never in my life heard this story about Jesus being lowered into this pit and being held in this pit before he went to go see Pontius Pilate. But Psalm 88 is very, very dark. And I tell you what, if someone... and so the idea was you were standing in this dark pit with only this one hole in the top and imagining what it would have been like. So if someone can read, let's just read Psalm 88 verses 1 through 7. And whoever gets there, just read that. Psalm 88, 1 through 7.
O Lord, God of my salvation, I cry out to you by day, I come to you at night. Now hear my prayer, listen to my cry, for my life is full of troubles and death draws near. I am as good as dead, like a strong man with no strength left. They have left me among the dead, and I lie like a corpse in a grave. I am forgotten, cut off from your care. You have thrown me into the lowest pit, into the darkest depth. Your anger weighs me down. With wave after wave you have engulfed me. You have driven my friends away by making me repulsive to them. I am in a trap with no way of escape. Right.
And so again, even though this isn't recorded in the Gospels, standing there in that pit, reading this psalm, it was interesting to think about perhaps that is what happened to Jesus. I don't know, but it was a very powerful thing to think about. Okay, this is the Mount of Olives, right? The Garden of Gethsemane, if you will. And so this is where Jesus would have been going to pray the night before his betrayal. And what I want you to see is how close it is. That's standing, on the Mount of Olives, looking up at Jerusalem. And remember, there's that gate again, the beautiful gate. But even though it's steep, what I want you to see, though, is how close it was, right? Because I don't know, sometimes in my mind I had these pictures of how far they would have had to walk and things like that. That's very close. So you can see the soldiers, coming over to get him. They didn't have far to go. And then when they arrest him, they don't have far to take him back up to Caiaphas' house. Okay, I want to talk about this in the few minutes we have left because this is really, really cool. In the Bible, there's a story about something called Hezekiah's tunnel. And let's read these scriptures. Let's go to 2 Kings 20:20. Somebody, let's go over there, and whoever gets that can read it. 2 Kings 20:20.
Can you read it from the screen?
Or you can read it from the screen. That's true. Yeah.
The rest of the acts of Hezekiah and all of his might, and how he made the pool and the conduit, and brought water into the city, Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judea?
Okay, so the Bible specifically talks about a conduit that connected one of the springs outside the city into the city itself. And if you go to 2 Chronicles 32 and verse 30, that gives a little more of the history about why it was done and things like that. But so let's... well, that just says, and it was Hezekiah who stopped up the upper outlet of the waters of Gihon and directed them to the west side of the city of David. And Hezekiah prospered in all that he did. Does anybody remember, though, and this is just throwing it out there, why he did that? Yes?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
It was during the time when the Assyrians had laid siege to Jerusalem, and there was King Sennacherib, which was taking out all of the other cities, taking out,
Right.
Assyria had long ago already taken out Israel. And so they were next, right? Of course, Hezekiah was a God-fearing king. I don't want to say any more.
No, go ahead. Tell the story. Go ahead.
Well, of course, that was also during the time of Isaiah.
Right.
And Hezekiah cries out to God, and that's when the city had been laid sieged, and there were, I think, 175,000 soldiers, and God sent his angel in to take care of business.
Right.
And saved Hezekiah in Judah, Jerusalem, and they didn't get taken.
Right.
Yeah.
They were able to hold out. And certainly one of the reasons is to prepare for the siege. This is why Hezekiah built this tunnel, so that they would have fresh water inside the city, and then stopped it up so they wouldn't have any, the Babylonians, or the Assyrians, wouldn't have any fresh water on the outside. And so it's truly here it is. I don't know if you can see it. This is the Gihon Spring that's outside of Jerusalem. And here's the tunnel. They dug through solid rock. It's about 1,700 feet through solid rock, and to bring in fresh water inside the city of Jerusalem. And this is from, this is from the Gihon Spring. Again, it looks like water, but that's where it's from. Because two of us actually visited the tunnel. And, come on. There it is. Okay, so this is inside the city of Jerusalem, right? This is where you come out. But you start on the outside of the Gihon Spring, and you can actually walk through. This is the literal tunnel that they dug in about 700 BC. So it's been there for about 2,300 years. And you can see the water. It's clean, clear water that we're walking in. And that was just a truly amazing experience. And what's really cool is, talking about archaeological evidence, there was a plaque that was found in the 1800s. I say it was rediscovered. Let me go back just a minute. It was rediscovered, this tunnel was rediscovered in 1867 by this guy named Charles Warren. But what's really cool is when you're walking down, when he rediscovered it, he found this plaque in this tunnel. And this plaque is from that area, about 700 BC, in something called Old Hebrew, and it commemorates the spot where the two tunnel people met. One was digging from one way and one was digging for the other. And so there was this plaque commemorating where they met. And what's really cool is, on this side, you can see the chisel marks go this way, and coming from that way, the chisel marks go that way, and they meet right on the wall. And so this is huge, that there's an actual plaque from that era saying King Hezekiah built this tunnel. So when you come to the idea of archaeological proof, that's just truly amazing that there would be that kind of proof. And you can walk that and see it today. That was one of the highlights for me of the trip. I really enjoyed that. I already talked about Jericho, so I'm not going to talk about it again when we did our Bible class. But I wanted you to see this. This is pottery. Now, and it's probably a couple of thousand years old. What I wanted to say is that over there, you go to various archaeological sites, and they don't care if you pick up pottery. And part of the reason is, unless it's a very special protected site, then they might. But in general, you go to these old, they call them tells. That's where a city would have been. It's basically a big heap. Of course, in the United States, if you were to pick up anything, you'd get arrested for it, even if it's a couple of hundred years old. But here, this stuff is everywhere. That's what surprised me. This is when we were walking around the old city of Jericho. I mean, you can't kick the dirt without turning up shards of pottery. It's absolutely everywhere. So they don't care if you just pick it up. And this is, you can see that's part of a handle of a pot. And you can see how well it's made. It's very beautiful. So you're welcome to look at this. But it's amazing to think I could just walk around and pick up shards of pottery that are probably a couple of thousand years old. The history there and just seeing how it all works together is truly amazing. But like I said, just the pottery is just embedded in the dirt everywhere. And so some people on the tour were really getting into that. They were trying to find as much different kind of pottery as they could. But that's actually it. I think I may have just one summary slide. And I'm going to say this about archaeology. It's important to understand how it fits. For every, like someone once said, I remember when I was in Florida College, somebody said, if we could just find the spot in the Red Sea where there were all those Egyptians' chariots, had been covered up with water, that would prove conclusively the Bible is true. And the professor said, no, not really, because the non-believers would have another explanation, as to why that was or what happened. And so, although archaeology and things we've talked about can help affirm our faith, we can't turn to archaeology and say this proves that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead and is the only Son of God. We can't prove that. It can help us prove that the Bible is a reliable book, and it's not a book of fantasy like the Book of Mormon or other religious books that's rooted in history. But ultimately, we do have to make that step of faith to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, right? Just like they did in the first century, and just like we still have to today. But the point is, it's not an unreasonable faith. It's not faith that's based on, well, there's no proof for it, but you just have to believe it. It's not like that. It's a faith grounded in reason. Christianity is reasonable and logical, and I think that's what separates it from most of the other world religions. Yeah. What's that?
It's scientific too.
Absolutely. And I have a whole other class I do about evolution and creation. And how like I mentioned that earlier, you have to have a lot more faith, in my opinion, blind faith, to believe in evolution than you do in creation, because it just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's it. That's all I had. If anybody has any comments, I actually finished like 3 or 4 minutes early, so I guess everybody gets bonus recess time. But thanks everybody for your attention.
Yeah, we get to look at the.
Yeah, you can go look at the stuff.
Show and tell. Show and tell. So if they didn't mind me taking one, it's I might take it.
Absolutely, it's fine. I got other stuff. Oh, wait a minute. Where's the one from? Is that the one from?
This is it.
It's shaking up a little bit. You can see how cloudy it looks.
See what I'm thinking?
It could be. Oh, sure. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. I've read. So they are from Apologetics Press, and I subscribe to their magazines. I read them all the time. Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, they have lots of stuff online now. All kinds of videos. They have great resources.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's done a fantastic job.
No, I know. They have great material. They're some of the very best.
Jessica said you wanted some today, Jensen.
We're going down to either you believe it or you don't.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's right. That's right.
He said there's a prayer.
But the point is, we have good reason for it. It's not just crazy stuff. But I can think about it.
They must have had a manual too.
Next time.
You know, we rely on a lot of other
Yeah, wait, look, see, it even came with a certificate of authenticity, so, you know, it must be. It feels a lot more fragile. Yeah. So much hotter. Yeah.
Didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can tell, you know, it's very white. I don't know. I saw that. This is the real one. That's the real one. It's 2,000 years old. You can just touch But they're so common. I mean, it's just everywhere. It's everywhere. It's crazy. Yeah, it is crazy. And it's not just that city. I have like 5 or 6 other bags from other cities we visited, and people just pick it up. It's just everywhere. Yep. Oh, in this little box. Yeah, I just keep it in that little box. Yeah, because I don't have that much stuff, you know. I just bring it to I don't know enough to tell you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's my best way. Maybe. Yeah, it would be like, I mean, like today everybody has an iPhone, right? I mean, you think about it, every house would have had several, right? And so if you've got a million people in Jerusalem, you know, there had to be millions of lamps. And you look at it, you know, probably over, you know, they would have had this lamp shape over 100, 200 years. That's a lot of lamps. A lot of lamps. And multiple in every home. I mean, every home probably had 5 or 6. I mean, like, how many light bulbs do you have? Right? So they were in. Anyway, you're welcome. That's okay. These are replica oil lamps, and that's a real one. That's about 2,000 years old. That's a real one. And this is water from, like, this is from Jacob's well, where Jesus taught this Samaritan woman. This is That's true.
Because it's a lot different if you have to test it out.
And this is from the Gaiman Spring, which is just outside of Jerusalem. It's part of the But if you watch it, say if you watch it on
Well, that way I know.
yeah.
I got it.
Yeah. So these are just These are replicas. This is from the time of Jesus. So when you read in the Bible about oil lamps, this is what Israel lamps were. Yeah. So it has oil here. See, here's the little wick. Funny now. I should have done that. His sister's over there. No, you probably would have told her. This is not a candle. This is where the wick was. This would have been burned. So you probably would have held it up. Not like that.
It's just